Hello friends, my name is Ilya Emelianov and this is Hidden World. Today we are going to peel back the city we think we know and stand in a New York that feels both familiar and utterly alien. Imagine towers of glass and steel vanishing into mist, the streets gone quiet, and beneath our feet a landscape written by ice. That is where we are headed. Come with me. Part 1. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the heart of Manhattan without streets or sidewalks or subways. Picture bare bedrock shining after a fresh rain. Now let that bedrock lift and tilt like the back of some sleeping giant. The air tastes clean and sharp. In the distance you hear a deep sound, as if a thunderstorm was stalled just over the horizon. That is not thunder, it is ice. A sheet of ice taller than any skyline you know. It creeps forward and it melts back and it groans as it moves. New York lives under that ice for a very long time. 20,000 years ago, the city is not a city at all. It is a stage for water and stone and cold. The ground under your shoes in Central Park tells the story like a diary, if you know how to read it. On the smoothed faces of the rock, you can find long parallel scratches. Those scratches are the signature of moving ice loaded with grains of quartz and bits of broken stone. As the ice flows, it drags this sandpaper across the bedrock and leaves lines that point the way the ice traveled. There are places where the rock is shaped like a whaleback, gentle on one side and steep on the other, because the passing ice smoothed the up ice slope and plucked blocks from the down ice face. Every curve of that rock is a letter in a frozen alphabet. While the ice sculpts Manhattan, it builds new lands at the edge of its reach. Imagine the glacier as a bulldozer that never sleeps. It pushes piles of rubble ahead of its frozen blade. When the climate warms a little and the ice stops advancing, it leaves a ridge of that rubble at its front. Those ridges remain. Today, we call one of those long ridges Long Island. The gravel and sand under its soil mark the line where the ice paused and caught its breath. Then, the climate shifted again. The ice retreated, and a second ridge took shape. The island we know is really a pair of ancient pauses. The same story repeats in the low hills around Staten Island and in the quiet coves of New Jersey. The city sits within a necklace of old shorelines of the glacier itself. Now let us look out to sea. The ocean you know is lower in that cold world. Sea level falls as so much water is locked up as ice. The shoreline pulls far away to the south. The great river we call the Hudson carves a canyon through the exposed shelf. It rushes across a broad plain of grasses and shrubs that will one day lie below the waves. If you could stand at what we call the Battery and look south, you would not see a wide harbor. You would see a river valley running toward a distant blue line. Wind would whistle through dry reeds. Migrating birds would spiral high and then drop among pools and channels to feed. The ice does not only carve and bulldoze, it also dams and floods. As the front of the glacier melts, water pools against that shining wall of ice and forms enormous lakes. Some of those lakes are ancestors of the waters you know today. Imagine a lake spread over the lowlands upriver from the city. Its shoreline changes as the ice wall advances or retreats. Sometimes the water bursts through a weak point and races through the valley. Each pulse of water rearranges the land. In the shadow of these lakes and floods, fields of silt and clay settle in quiet places and build layers we can still read, page by page. The valley north of the city holds those pages. If you slice through a riverbank or a construction site there, you can count the seasons in delicate bands of mud as thin as a fingernail. The climate near the ice edge is fierce. Summer is short and full of insects. Winter is long and full of wind. The plants are hardy. They hug the ground, and they flex rather than snap. Scrubby spruce and birch huddle in sheltered hollows. Grasses and sedges stitch together open ground like a tough grey blanket. In that space of cold and light and endless sky, animals pass through in waves. They follow the seasons and the scent of water. They follow each other. The city you know is asleep then, but the landscape is not quiet. It is alive with movement. Think about what that means for the places we walk now. A jogger crosses a paved path in a park and never notices that the path follows the gentle slope of an ancient ice-sculpted ridge. A commuter rides a subway that dips and turns to find the soft ground of an old meltwater channel. Row houses sit on sandy soil that was once a river bar at the foot of a melting wall of ice. Ferries cross a harbour that was once a dry valley where wind kicked dust in looping spirals. Everything we call ordinary rests on an extraordinary foundation. The past lies just below the surface, close enough to touch. Part 2. Now let us meet the neighbours of that frozen time. They are giants and shapeshifters and long-distance travellers. If you stood quietly near an ancient marsh where the edge of the glacier had recently pulled back, the ground would tremble with footsteps you would not quite believe. Out of the mist would appear a mastodon, a cousin of elephants, yet not the same. A mastodon is built like a forest worker, with rugged ribs and a powerful trunk. Its teeth are studded, like a rasp for chewing branches and needles. It pushes through young spruce, peels the bark, and leaves behind shredded twigs that glitter with frost. The breath from its trunk rises like smoke in the cold air. In more open places, you might see mammoths. A mammoth grazes like a very large bison with a trunk. Its teeth have fine ridges made for grinding grasses. Its coat is thick and tries to make a wall between a body full of warm blood and air that cuts like a blade. A mammoth lifts the snow with the edge of its tusks and sweeps to find old seed heads and frozen clumps of sedge. Where a herd has passed, the snow is patterned with scoops and pits. Under the snow, the earth is scraped in arcs that mirror the curve of tusk and trunk. When the wind dies, you can hear the steady crunch of molars and the low rumble that passes between animals who do not need words to know what to do. Near beaver ponds in that ancient world, you would meet a creature that feels like a myth that stepped out of a story. The giant beaver is the size of a black bear. It swims with calm power through cold brown water and carries branches that look far too big for any rodent. It builds dams that reshape whole valleys. When it slaps its tail, the report echoes through the trees and sends ducks scattering. In the quiet after, you can see the water rise half an inch behind the dam and begin to creep into a new channel. That is power, not the loud kind, the patient kind. The kind that changes everything by being very good at one simple task. Out on the tundra, like flats, where the wind runs without stopping, caribou pick their way across frozen ground. They move in loose lines and arc around drifts. Their hooves click on stones, and their breath leaves small clouds that wink and vanish. They are born to migrate, to read the small signs in snow as if they were sentences. Lichens stand on the menu next to sedges and willow buds. The animals dance a slow dance with the seasons, always returning, always going. We can imagine wolves shadowing the herds, not the wolves we know today, but larger forms adapted to bigger prey and wider horizons. The pack moves like a single thought. It chooses which animal to test and when to commit. In the brush, big cats wait for luck and for carelessness. They listen for the step that betrays a sprain or a stumble. In a ridge of boulders, bears overturn rocks to search for sleeping insects and a bite of fish left by a winter eagle. Life is dangerous in this place and time, but it is beautiful too, full of balance and pattern. These animals do more than survive. They carve their signatures into the land. Mastodons create open groves by breaking young trees. Mammoths cut paths with their feet that become streams in the spring. Giant beavers flood a hollow, and years later, that hollow fills with peat that records pollen grain by tiny grain. Caribou sear trails into the tundra that guide the next herd and the next. Every creature is a geologist and a gardener without ever knowing the words. That is why fossils are not just bones. They are proof of a community. A rib of a mastodon is also a snapshot of a forest. A tusk with growth rings is a calendar of lean years and good years. A tooth from a giant beaver is also a map of the pond. It kept prodigy perfect. A caribou antler found on a sandy terrace is a line drawn across a valley. When we are lucky, these objects stay where they are and whisper their secrets. When we are luckier still, someone digs in exactly the right place, and the whisper becomes a voice. Part 3. People walk into this world with careful steps. You can imagine the first small groups following rivers, because rivers are paths that never lie. A river points to fish, to game trails, to wood for fires, to stone that breaks just so. Imagine coming upon a cliff that glittered with the kind of rock that makes excellent points for hunting spears. Your heart would quicken. You would sit with a friend near the base of that cliff and begin to practice the rhythm of napping. Strike, turn, strike, breathe, then strike again. Chips would fly and ring on the ground like glass. When you held the finished point to the light, the flicker of the flake scars would look like scales. Shelter might be a shallow cave overlooking a fold in the valley, or a hidden terrace above a bend in the river where the wind is softer. Smoke would rise straight up on a calm morning. Around the fire there would be tales of animals seen and missed, of a trail that looked promising and turned to nothing, of a lake that did not freeze as early as last year. Elders would weigh those signs and decide to stay for 2 more days or to move toward the coast. Children would learn to carry embers in a bundle of moss, to lay a trap without leaving a smell, to kneel and read hoofprints as if they were letters. The coast itself would be very different from what we know now. Where there is water today, there was land then. The rivers that now meet the sea in our bright, busy harbour once joined each other and wandered across a plain that now sleeps under waves. People would have walked that plain and gathered along those ancient banks. They might have camped on a low rise and woken to fog. They might have followed shorebirds to hidden pools and surprised seals on sandbars where no boat crosses now. Parts of that world are gone, but not all. The shape of a buried channel can still echo in the way currents move and in the way sand shifts during storms. The past leaves fingerprints even when it seems to have left nothing at all. Here is a scene that feels true. It is late spring. A group returns to a site it knows. The glacier has pulled away farther. A young birch grove trembles in a steady breeze. There is clean water nearby, and the fish are more active than last year. 2 hunters walk a ridge and find a scatter of broken flakes they left in autumn, now dusted with pollen. They smile. One kneels and picks up a small blade he had been shaping. He turns it once in the sun. He finishes it now and sets it gently beside his tools. It feels like a conversation between past and present and future. That conversation continues every time someone finds such a place again and recognizes the story in a handful of stones. People here would have known the giant animals, They would have followed herds, and sometimes the herds would have followed them. They would have studied the habits of mastodons who visit the same stands of trees year after year. They would have mapped the watering places of mammoths. They would have watched ripples for the telltale V of a beaver and learned where to set a snare or where to leave it empty. They would have given animals names that meant more than our labels. They would have held ceremonies for luck, for gratitude, for the safe return of children. In this world, the edge of the glacier is not just scenery. It is a boundary that people keep in their thoughts. It is a wall that leaks water and sometimes stones. It is a sign that seasons change and that even enormous things can fade. Camps move as the ice moves. Routes shift. The idea of home is a circle rather than a dot. You can feel that circle still when you stand at a lookout today and your eye traces the sweep of the river and the line of the hills. The view invites motion. The view suggests a path. We did not invent that feeling. We inherited it. Part 4. Now let us walk forward in time with a long stride. The ice has gone. The sea has returned to its higher bed. The city rises. Stone meets brick meets steel. Streets fill with carriages, then with cars, then with a flood of people. But the past does not vanish. It rides up the elevator with the crew and waits in the mud for a shovel. A new building needs a deep foundation. The machines bite into the ground, and each bucket clanks up full of sand or clay or gravel. Suddenly, there is something else among the river stones. It is curved, heavy, and pale. A worker brushes away the dirt and pauses. Someone calls a supervisor. The city noise goes on, but around that discovery, a little circle of quiet opens. The object is taken to a lab and cleaned. It is a fragment of a giant, a rib or a tusk tip or a tooth with ridges like a washboard. On the table, it is gentle. In life, it belonged to a creature as large as a bus. That is how the Ice Age speaks to the modern age. It shows up to work. Cliffs do the same quiet work. Along the edge of the ocean, where the wind never tires, waves eat at bluffs of sand and silt that were piled by the glacier long before there was a city. Each winter storm bites a little farther. The face of a bluff slumps in the spring rain and a new layer is exposed. Within that layer, a fossil seed glints or a piece of bone peeks out. A beachcomber stops. A child kneels with a plastic shovel and finds a treasure that sat unbothered through the rise and fall of entire civilizations. The sea gives and takes. And while it takes, it also tells a story for anyone who cares to listen. Even in parks and gardens, the Ice Age finds a way to wave hello. A gardener plants a tree and hits a stone the size of a melon that does not match the bedrock of the neighborhood. It was carried there in the belly of the glacier and dropped like a calling card. A homeowner starts a vegetable patch and uncovers a layer of clay so fine that rainwater sits for days. That clay settled quietly in a summer on the shore of a glacial lake. A hiker pauses on a smooth oval of rock polished like a table. That polish came from a billion little scratches made by sand in the base of the ice. The everyday city holds a museum with no doors and no closing time. This is why construction and erosion are not enemies of history. They are translators. They pull words from a language of stone and present them in a language we can read. Of course, we want to protect what we can, to record, to preserve, to share with care and respect. But we also should recognize that the city itself is always digging into its own memory and bringing up new pages. The Book of New York is not done. It is a living document written by bulldozers and by storms, by teachers and by kids on a beach with a plastic pail. Part 5. So why does this deep past matter for our future? Because the city is a machine that sits on a landscape created by ice, and that landscape still sets the rules. The ridges and hollows formed by the glacier steer water every time it rains. Sandy soils left by meltwater drink and drain fast, while clays laid in quiet lakes hold water for days. Where the ground is soft and layered, buildings settle with time. Where the ground is hard and crystalline, foundations feel different stresses. The old channels of streams that braided and wandered under a waning ice sheet can still guide floodwaters during heavy storms. When we map those old channels, we plan better. The coast tells a similar story. A harbour that was once a dry valley is a beautiful place for ships and skylines. It is also exposed to the moods of the sea. The shape of the drowned canyon carved by the old river can focus waves like the lens of a camera. Storms follow those lines and push water in ways that surprise us if we have forgotten the shape of the floor. Sandbars that shift with every season lie over ridges of ancient gravel that do not shift in the same way. If we want to protect neighborhoods and subways and schools, we need to see not just the water surface, but the ghost of the land beneath, the one sculpted by ice and uncovered when the sea was low. Look again at the long ridges built by the glacier's front. They are more than the backbone of nearby islands. They are storehouses of sand and gravel that feed beaches and protect the shore. When a storm pulls a beach away, those ridges can help build it back. When a jetty or a wall is placed without respect for the way that sand wants to travel, the beach disappears for a while, and the next storm speaks louder. If we set structures in harmony with the way the land and sand have moved for thousands of years, we spend less money and save more places. The glacier did the heavy lifting long ago. We need to read its map. The same past helps us think about long arcs of time. Ice sheets grow and shrink as climate shifts. They respond to changes in temperature and in the way heat moves through air and water. The record of that growth and retreat is written in the layers beneath the city and in the shells and pollen buried in river mud. When we read those records well, we understand what happens when the world warms. We see how water returns to the sea. We see how shorelines migrate. We stop thinking of the coast as a line and start thinking of it as a broad zone that advances and retreats like a tide that takes decades. That change in thinking is not academic. It guides how we build schools, hospitals, and transit. It guides where we restore wetlands so that they can soften the blow of storms and provide room for fish and birds and people. Understanding our glacial past changes how we tell the city's story. Instead of a place that sprang from nothing as soon as the first pier rose, we tell a story that begins with bedrock and ice and wind. It makes the city feel both more fragile and more enduring. Fragile because it sits on a stage set by forces far larger than any one person. Enduring because the stage itself is strong and old and full of clues about how to play our part with grace. When you teach a child to find a glacial scratch on a rock or a fossil leaf in a slice of riverbank, you are not only pointing at something neat. You are giving that child a sense of belonging to a story that includes mastodons and mammoths and caribou. A story that also includes subway riders and bakers and teachers. I like to stand at a particular rock in Central Park. It is not a secret rock. Many people walk over it every day. The rock is smooth on top and grooved with lines that run like tracks on a record. I put my hand on it and think about the weight that once lay here. I think about how the ice shifted its hip and left that curve. I think about how the same rock now warms in the sun while a child eats a pretzel a few steps away. The child laughs. A dog tugs at a leash. A couple poses for a photo. A musician plays a tune that drifts like a small paper boat. None of them know they are standing on a page from a book written in a language the city almost forgot. But the page is still there, patient and clear. If we treat the city as a living archive rather than a finished sculpture, we can make better choices. We can design parks that soak up rain where old streams once ran. We can choose street trees that thrive in the soils left by ancient lakes. We can set new buildings in places where the ground is ready to hold them and reinforce places where the ground will always shift. We can tell architects and engineers and schoolchildren the same thing. The map you start with is not only the map of streets and lots, it is also the map of ice and water carved into the land. Learn that map and the city becomes kinder. There is also a gift in this way of seeing. The gift is wonder. The word city can sound like stone and glass, fixed and heavy. But New York is a river of moments. It began as ice and wind across rock. It grew step by step, with animals and people moving along the same lines. It gathered storytellers who chipped truth from stone and teachers who passed the story on. Today it gathers people from everywhere and asks them to add their own chapters. When you walk the streets with a glacial map in your mind, everything feels richer. A hill becomes the last breath of a forgotten winter. A park pond becomes a window into an old lake. A stretch of beach becomes a conversation between sand and time. You become part of the conversation. In the end, the glacier teaches patience and humility. It shows us that great change can be slow and unstoppable, and also that small choices made again and again can shape the world. The ice dragged particles of sand across rock for years to polish one surface. We can make daily choices about how we build and where we plant and what we protect, and those choices will polish a better city for our kids. The ice retreated and made room for forests and people. We can retreat a little from places where the sea wants to return and make room for wetlands that protect the places we love. The glacier was not kind or cruel. It was real. We can be real too. So the next time you stand on a subway platform and feel the rumble under your feet, think for a second about a different rumble, the one that came from a living wall of ice. When you cross a bridge, glance down at the current and imagine it running across dry land to a sea far away. When you pass a construction site, look at the piles of sand and clay and try to read the pages there. When you visit the shore, watch the waves edit the cliffs and consider how long that writing has been going on. Let those thoughts make you curious. Curiosity is not just a hobby. It is a tool that protects and improves the city. Thank you for walking through the frozen city with me. If you felt the past pressing gently against your palm as we told this story, carry that feeling into your day. The Ice Age is not gone. It lives underfoot, in the shape of the streets and the grain of the rock, in the stories we tell each other to make sense of this remarkable place. Until next time, keep your eyes open. The old world is always just an inch below the surface, waiting to be seen.